I've always heard that it's 5 o'clock somewhere. And even though it's 4:38 p.m. here on Friday the 17th of April, and it's 2026, that's close enough. And I'm about to be sitting on my dad's tailgate, but I assure you that's no type of euphemism. It is true. Let's turn this music down a little bit. I'm getting John Denver freaking all making me get confused with what's going on in my own head. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, here I am, sampling some of the finery. And, pretty low-key day. Honestly, yesterday I was so jazzed because I went for that fun bike ride. And I felt like I still had so much to say, but today was a little bit more. I guess it was just actually, let me see, make sure this is not recording from my headphones. Okay, hopefully that didn't mess everything up, but it doesn't really matter. I had my opening line when I came over to this little spot where my car is, and I was like, where can I sit over here that's comfortable? And I was like, oh, there's not really anywhere to sit. But then I was like, well, I could put my dad's tailgate down and probably sit on that. And then I was like, that kind of sounds a little bit suggestive. And then I was like, that sounds kind of funny. Oh, this is not comfortable. Okay. I'm searching. I think the tailgate's probably fine. Let's see if this tire, that does feel like it's going flat. That was one thing that I wanted to do today, was to swap out my tires, because I have a relatively new-ish set of Marathon Plus Schwalbes, and there's something embedded in this tire somewhere. I'm going to have to take a fine-tooth comb to it, because it was continuously going flat. So there must be something that's pushed just enough on the inside of the tire to where I can't see it from the outside, and then it catches the rubber of the tube. So that'll be... It happened today. I can tell it's going flat. So I'll need to figure it out, and I won't feel confident about this issue until I extract what I'm sure must be some kind of small metal splinter. But in any case, let's take a seat. Yeah, that's not bad as far as sitting on a truck bed goes. I actually think this is an American pastime, at least as popular as baseball. To sit on a freaking tailgate? Yeah. So, I am glad to say that I didn't really have a lot of thoughts today, so I don't feel like I'm catching up with myself in some kind of way where I have to account for a bunch of stuff that I may not necessarily even have the bandwidth to discuss. But, suffice it to say, it was a very good day. Woke up at around 7-ish, and then went inside and started doing some digital Needfuls. There were a few things that I wanted to do. It was fun to actually post an episode of the podcast and use my laptop for it. That was such a nice experience, I have to say. The ease of use and just the power of the processor, everything was just so much quicker. I'd say on average, best case scenario, I can probably post an episode with my phone in let's say I could do the whole thing in 8 minutes, which isn't that bad. But if I've got multiple episodes, then that means, we're looking at possibly 20 plus minutes of time being used to do all of the steps for recording this stuff. And then, so basically I was just able to use my computer, and it was very fast. Go figure. I suppose that's a sort of a no-duh situation. And I have to say, shout out to my dude James. There's a fellow Atlanta guy out there. He's, I guess, attempting to at least be an influencer / YouTuber, so I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying that his name is Drew Boardman, at DROO. Was it Drew Boo? I actually don't remember. But it was interesting. I was watching a YouTube video that he made about his recent decision to be a digital nomad himself. And I have to say, while watching it, first of all, very well done, Second of all, there is no way I could ever do that. Like I always get this kind of wild hair about the idea of like doing a video element to my podcast or making some kind of video, but I'm not a visual person, and I don't really have the skill set to, or the interest. It's really the interest, because like it'd be one thing if I was actually really interested in something, because then obviously I could make the effort to get better at it. But I really don't like expressing myself visually. It's just too much to consider, And I know it's obviously a very effective and very popular medium. People would much rather look at something or watch something as compared to listening to something. So maybe I was just born in the wrong time. Perhaps back in the days of the radio, I'd have been freaking living the dream, my dude. But here we are in a post-radio society. And so it's just it's a matter of mismatch of preferred mediums, I love audio because it's so consumable. Like, you can be doing pretty much anything, and adding a podcast or adding music to it, in my experience, only makes it better, You cannot say the same for things you need to watch, I think. Like, as soon as your vision is taken away, as soon as your vision is required by whatever medium you're consuming, then you have to be stationary. And I guess for me, not wanting to be stationary, it's just never really, I didn't really develop a taste for it. Like, I don't like watching stuff. Like, I will watch things, and I have watched things, and I'm not going to say that I don't enjoy it from time to time, but it's not my preference. It's just, it's too consuming of a medium. I don't know why I'm still talking about this, but Drew had an awesome video going over like his decision-making process for this life change, and like where he's going with his own plans and all that kind of stuff. And while I really did enjoy it, I certainly was like, man, I would never want to do this. Like, he's got a drone, he's got like, what are those things called? Tripods and all that kind of stuff. There's no way. Like, it would be one thing if I could just like take the footage, but doing the whole thing of like having to have the presence of mind to record something video-wise, then having to edit it and then produce like a good-looking like video, and then also publishing that. Like, we're going from like, my files when I'm uploading them are like, a couple of dozens of megabytes. Like, maybe a long episode could be 50 megabytes, but if I was doing like a 47-minute podcast that I wanted to do an audio or a video companion to, that would be so many gigabytes, and it would be so battery intensive. And I've tried all this stuff before, and I just never really liked it. Didn't like making reels for the same reason. It was the exact same stressors and pressure, but just in a shorter like time frame. And I couldn't find. I could. Well, it doesn't really matter. I'm just not going to do it, which is fair enough. So, bunch of digital Needfuls this morning, and somehow it got to be around noon. I guess I would, my first little bit of energy in the morning usually feels like the most productive, both, or like in every capacity of my day. Physically, mentally, everything feels the most doable up in the morning. And then there's just sort of a steady decline from that point. But at some point I had decided, I don't remember when I thought about this, but I have the sleeping platform in my car now, and it's great. But something that I wanted to be able to do with it, since like, I was a big fan of Alton Brown and the show that he had on the Food Network. What was it called? Oh my God. Man, I'll have to think about it. But he took a very cool, like, analytical and scientific approach to cooking. And what was it called? What's this? What's that? I don't remember. Anyway, I just remember this one episode where he was talking about how in your kitchen you should never have any kind of appliance or device or anything like that if you can help it, that is a unitasker. He said, always try to get something that does at least a couple of different things. And that just always kind of stuck with me because, like, if something's taking up space, it would be nice if it had additional functionality, And so for the bed, because of the way that my the trunk of my car kind of contours from the footwells all the way up to like where the back of the trunk is, I have two different sizes of legs with a 8-inch difference between the two. The legs that are closest to the trunk are 8 inches shorter than the legs that are closest to the steering wheel, the driver's seat, and the passenger seat, because those legs in the area where the driver is closest, that goes into the footwell. So they're 8 inches different. And I was like, well, I don't know how practical this is, but it would be nice to be able to like take this thing out of the car for a variety of different reasons, I'm sure. But at a minimum, it would be nice to be able to use this platform as like a preparation area, like at least be able to like make food on a stable surface that's level, and also like, possibly use it for bike work or whatever might need to be done. Like, it's nice to have a platform that isn't on the ground. And so today I went and biked to Home Depot and Walmart. Shout out to my friend Josh. I guess I'll keep your anonymity. But yeah, he had looked at my plans and the eventual creation of the bench, and he was like talking about how I could use hinges and locking sash locks and things like that, like windows typically have, to make like a collapsible leg. And so went to Home Depot, got the few things that I needed, went to Walmart and got my black shirt that I think I'll need for my infiltration of Silicon Valley. And then I headed back and I worked on the hinged leg for, I don't know, maybe an hour or so. My dad ended up showing up again, so there's nothing that says Pereira Power like two Pereira men working together on something. And so we were able to put our heads together and figure out how this could be done. Because, I guess if I had known initially that making it into a bench would be a nice way to extend the functionality of it beyond just its most basic utility, then I probably would have been able to think about how to integrate extendable legs, which reminds me of Harry Potter with the extendable ears. Shout out to Fred and George. But yeah, in any case, all that's working now. I have a cool little platform. And now I guess if I ever want to, for some reason, I could technically sleep outside. I could cowboy camp on top of this thing. I don't know why I would ever want to do that, especially because I plan to bring my tent and all that kind of stuff, and I'm just as comfortable on the ground as I am on that platform, with the setup that I have. So that probably won't happen, but it's nice to know that it can happen. You know what I'm saying? I think that you do. So, yeah, basically that brought us to like right now, and here I am. I was able, one of my Needfuls this morning, I was able to consolidate my list items. I'm not sure how many of them are worth talking about, but yeah, let's take a look. Okay, yeah, so there is this smell, this grassy kind of extremely earthy smell of this plant that I've never been able to find out what it is. It's something that I distinctly associate with the Appalachian Trail. And, I'm not someone who knows a lot about trees or plants or any foliage item. Like, I know the difference between what a tree is and what grass is, and I can tell you the difference between like a bush and a tree. But beyond that, like, I don't know Latin names or even common names, so I've always kind of been at a loss. But since I have like an abundance of time now, I started talking to Gemini about it earlier this morning, and its first guess does appear to be the thing that I have been smelling for 8 years or something like that, and just been like, I don't know what that is, but I like it. It smells nice, and what it is I think it's called Vernal Sweetgrass, and it was interesting to read over like the Wikipedia explanation of why it smells the way that it does, and there was an interesting caveat that you should not make tea out of it because one of the chemicals that causes the fragrance is a precursor to anticoagulants. So just kind of an interesting thing. Going back to that Joe Rogan and Michael Pollan episode from the recent past where they were saying, one of the most interesting things about plants is that anesthesia works on them. It's also interesting that on the opposite side of the equation, plant-derived compounds, which is not surprising because, aspirin is from like the bark of a willow tree or something like that. But it's interesting that a plant with its own biochemistry and its own reasons for having things be the way that they are have like a very direct and possibly lethal effect on our own biochemistry. It's almost like we have a common ancestor in the past or something like that. You know what I'm saying? I think that you do. But yeah, if you're familiar with Vernal Sweetgrass and you like it too, go ahead and give this a thumbs up. Very specific, very nice fragrance, if I do say so myself. Yeah, okay, which one do I want to do? Okay, I probably don't have a lot to say about this, but I was thinking about a couple of people who I've listened to interviews of who are like accomplished thru hikers and things like that, people who are like they have some level of notoriety within the thru hiking community, and it does seem like some degree of trauma, it's not always present, but it seems like it has often been an accompanying part of people's reason for wanting to pursue long distance journeys as like a part of their identity. And so I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, like, what's the connection there? Like, in my own experience of life, like, I think that what the trail does for me in a very like passive but effective way is that it removes my need for control by simply ripping it out of my hands and not giving it back to me, And so if I like the thing that I'm doing, the hiking, the biking, the camping, whatever it is, part of the equation that I have to figure out ways to like regulate myself through involves basically coming to terms with one of my greatest frustrations, which is, I guess, the feeling that I'm out of control, And so having that kind of just incrementally taken away over the course of a thru hike in one way or another, whether it's being pantlessly sick in the woods or not knowing where the next water supply is or having a storm disrupt your plans, whatever it might be. They say man makes plans and God laughs. But so yeah, like dovetailing that into other people who have had different kinds of traumatic experiences in life. And like, I feel like, what do they say? The easiest way to stop a habit is to pick up another one or something like that. But I feel like, in all honesty, like long distance hiking is a traumatic experience, and it's one that actually pays dividends. Like, I don't think that trauma, like, there's this concept of eustress, like EUSTRESS, like euphoric stress kind of a thing, or just the opposite of like distress. And so I think that the trauma, like the positive trauma of hiking in and of itself, as long as it's not being actually hijacked by some other agent that is actively traumatizing you worse than maybe you had been before. I was just thinking that like thru hiking might actually replace, like it would, the hardware in the human body is like, it's set up to process input, and so if you have like this PTSD from something in your life, like you can start to basically retrain your body to have different triggers for it. And again, because I think that the triggers for the trauma that can occur in the woods are like generally speaking positive, because like, you know, the stakes aren't actually really that high. Like they could be if you mess up, but in general, like through hiking is a very survivable activity, but it feels very intense at the time. And so my original note was like wanting to explore if I could kind of conceptualize why through hiking might make PTSD worse. But now that I've thought about it, I think that actually it might be a good way of like redirecting your demons. You know, I'm seeing an image of a dog sled, and like the difference between undirected trauma versus directed trauma is the same difference between dogs that are running in line in a specific direction that's guided by the human. In this case, the human stands for like, you know, prefrontal cortex, and then the dogs are kind of like your, let's say, sympathetic nervous system, possibly. That versus, you know, dogs that are just like fighting and running in different directions and not creating productive movement forward. So who even knows, my dude? I did have a couple other thoughts. I was thinking about my experience with homeless people, and why my experiences with them usually have a certain timbre to them, especially if I've had a carbonated recovery beverage or two. And I think that it actually, well, this was just a thought, but I was wondering if it had something to do with my body language. I was talking to Gemini about it a little bit, and the word that it used to describe what I was describing about my own self was propinquity, which is not a word that I've heard before, but it's like the feeling of kinness, or kinship, rather, or kinness, I suppose, like being kin, that can be evoked in other people because of your body language, because of like open posture and like eye contact and moving your head in the right direction and stuff like that when people say things. And I just thought that was really interesting, because I was like, obviously if I was a homeless person and someone was like giving me attention and money, I would feel very grateful for that, and I probably would have a lot of esteem for that person in that moment. But I was just wondering, in general, like, if that's kind of my default position, and like what that actually means for the majority of my social interactions, because I feel like I can meet a stranger in any walk of life, and kind of just very quickly have a very warm experience with them, as if we'd known each other for years. And it really doesn't matter what kind of person gets presented to me. I feel like I can find that same, I have that same level of interaction no matter what kind of person it is. In my own experience, I feel like talking about this, there's a possibility of it being uncharismatic, because I feel like the undercurrent of what I'm saying is that I am very likable, and that's something that I'm not doing on purpose, which is honestly how I feel. And I also immediately go to ex-girlfriends who might say, they might have a lot of evidence to actually the contrary about how I'm actually not likable, or maybe how I'm initially likable because of my physical presentation, but then because that has nothing to do with like my actual underlying thought patterns or anything, the truth comes out in the wash. You know, it's just like, oh, like, yeah, you present as someone who is like very open and very empathetic, but if you actually got to know me, as some people have, you know, it turns out that I'm basically more or less the same as everybody else, which is what I would assume. But also, it's just an interesting thought to think that I have developed unconsciously body language and postures that facilitate a certain type of human interaction. And then I guess I either live up to that or I don't. That wasn't as bad to discuss as I thought. When I was talking about it in my head yesterday, when I had the initial thought, I was like, some of the things that I'm willing to talk about, I feel like, you know, there was a period in my life when I was younger, like when I was a teenager, where I feel like I almost explicitly gave myself permission to think about anything because like I didn't want to get bogged down in the possibility that I might miss out on essential truth just because it was inconvenient or otherwise uncomfortable. And so as I would have thoughts, like I would try to kind of navigate my way through them to the best of my ability with the tools that I had at the time, which certainly were far less developed and far less accessible as compared to now, which I would hope so. The trajectory, I would hope that it's going up and to the right and not a flat line or at the worst, getting worse. But yeah, I was thinking like, when I was thinking about doing a video series or companion, I was like, I need to have like a parental advisory, like warning at the beginning of this, like that, like everything I'm saying is probably not true. And at best, it might be 30% true about myself if I can even muster the words that are accurate enough to my feelings to describe it. But, I do want to grant myself that kind of not ability, but that kind of levity or that kind of license. That's the word I was looking for. Like within reason, I want to be able to consider anything I could about myself and others. I don't really broadcast the things about others because I feel like that's even more worthless. But the things that I think about myself, like I'm willing to talk about those and record those and put them out publicly just because I'm like, well, like, my whole point is refinement. And the worst thing that can happen would be someone would disagree with me vehemently and basically possibly try to hurt me because of what I have said in a moment of vulnerable authenticity. But honestly, even that, if I paid attention to it at all, would be good data, because I believe that all data is good data. So if nothing else, it would make me wonder about that person, just be like, like it really bothers you that much that I feel this way about something, and that has nothing to do with you whatsoever, aside from the fact that you happen to hear me say it. That's interesting to me. So that's that. Okay. I don't know how true this is, but it is a thought that I had yesterday. And I've talked about this with my friend James a lot. Speaking of my friend James, here comes my friend Dad. All right. We're back. Yeah. Let's see. What else do I got? Well, I guess just in terms of concepts, this is one that I feel like I've finally started to get an intuitive grasp on, and it's been something that I really like to think about. Those things, what were those things? Those things that you would see at like a novelty store that you could put your face into. It had like a bunch of pins, and you could pin face. They probably sold them at Spencer's. What was that thing called? Oh man. Well, hold on. Let me do some actual good research. Okay, so these things are called pin art toys. Google it if you don't know what I'm talking about. But something, given the recent release of Anthropic's Mythos, in the description of how it was able to find so many zero-day vulnerabilities, which, again, a zero-day vulnerability is when, like, there is a critical, let's call it like a unintended backdoor that software designers had no idea was there, and that they would have 0 days to fix if it became known to them that this vulnerability existed. The reason that Mythos was able to find all of those vulnerabilities is because it looks at human text and human generated computer code from a variety of dimensionalities and can create connections between points that human beings would never be able to organically put together, because it requires a completely different type of cognition to even see those connections. It's called high dimensional vector space. And I really like that concept in general, because I feel like that's the thing that I've been kind of tapping into amorphously, like, again, thinking about the pin art toy, like when you push all of those pins in, like every single one is at a slightly different elevation relative to every other one in order for the image to appear. And so for me, as I think about it, like, human beings, we think linearly. So like literally in straight lines, like there's 3 dimensions, right? Up, down, left, right, back, forth. Like those are the lines in which our cognition also occurs, But there is a higher dimensional space where there are connections that can be made in ways that are nonlinear. Like I can only view it linearly in my head, because even using the pin art toy, that's just using like 2 dimensions in order to create those images. But again, the general, thesis is the same. It's like, basically we are limited. Like if our consciousness was a butterfly net, the holes in between the netting itself would be quite large. A lot of things would go right through them. But if we're just using a net for a certain size thing, then, because that's the thing that we were aiming to catch, then it's the perfect tool. But if there are things even beyond your conscious knowledge that could be captured with this metaphorical net, you would never even be able to design it in such a way as to get them, because you can't even conceive of a mechanism, let alone just the thing itself. Like, how do you meet a higher dimension on its own terms? If like a higher dimension just literally means like one you can't conceive of. So it's a bit of a paradox there, like being able to think about how you could protect yourself from a higher dimensional cyber attack. The only way you can do that is with AI, which I'm sure that's what they will do. They will fill all of these holes. They'll basically repoint it like brickwork, They'll go through, they'll see all the holes and be able to create patches to close up those vulnerabilities. But, I just think that it's an interesting lesson, yet again, because I feel like this whole episode has been balanced between a lot of self-indulgence and then a pursuit of humility. But, yeah, something about that just really turns my brain on. It's just like, that's very interesting. Again, like James Webb Telescope, like none of these images that we're seeing are actually the images themselves. They've been, I think they called it chromatically matched to colors that equal the otherwise invisible spectrums of light that we don't have access to because of the way that we evolved. And similarly, when it comes to digital space and computational digital space, I just think it's fascinating that we can access these higher levels of categorization and basically manipulate them, even though we can't directly observe them in a meaningful way without using the tool that creates them itself. So, yeah, I just like that this thing that I feel like I've been playing with, which is that I think I'm a high fidelity sensory array, but I have a very specific and narrow scope, and the aperture of artificial intelligence is so much wider. And it's interesting because, it's interesting to think that consciousness and sentience, as we describe it and as we define it, which is difficult to do, but you know it when you got it, it might not actually be something that can be experienced by a higher dimensional being. Is that the correct word? A higher dimensional entity, our subjective feeling of awareness might be too small. Like, what does consciousness even mean for something that can perceive hundreds of thousands of dimensional space relationships with concepts and meaning and all these kinds of things? Like, where would the ego which is an essential part of the human experience, where would that even fit in? Like it's kind of like looking at a car and being like, oh, but where do the horseshoes go? And it's like, well, the car, you don't need horseshoes because it's not a horse. But, a diehard horse rider, which I think is what they're called, like, they'd be like, well, I see the world through a horseshoe-shaped lens. So if you're telling me there's no horseshoes on here, I don't get it, because that's, like, not the way that my world works, I think that's about all I can say about that, my dude. So, since this has been something that has been so self-indulgent and generally, like, that balance between self-indulgence and humility. I have a writing that was written about me by, I don't even want to say that she's an ex-girlfriend, because that seems like both too much and too little to describe her with. The sense that I always got while we were together was that we were two artists who had collided at a certain time that was not a time where anything sustainable could be created, but a time in which, like, a meaningful exchange and experience for both of us could be shared. Like, it felt transient the whole time, even though I was like, I could see myself, like, being with this person, in the long run. But yeah, she is a writer, which is one of the things that I liked a lot about her, because she was a very deep thinker and someone who was very good with language. And she's writing a piece, perhaps a book. I don't want to speak for her. I know that this is something intended for publication, possibly. But I asked her last night, because she sent this my way back when I was in Glasgow, Virginia. And I really enjoyed reading it, and also enjoyed putting it into Notebook LM and seeing what they thought about it. But with her permission, I asked if I could read it on my podcast, because I was like, this needs to live somewhere in my content, just because it's like a really interesting look into me from a different perspective, which I certainly need as much as I can get. So, I'm not very good at reading. Perhaps you can recall I'm voluntarily illiterate, but I was going to do my best to try to read through this and do it justice and not stumble over my words too much or put in unnecessary pauses. I've certainly listened to a lot of content surrounding it, so I'm hoping that it'll feel a little second nature to read it again. But this will be the conclusion, and so this is my former associate's take on me as a person and the time that we spent together. So let's see how it goes. A month or so before taking my second polygraph, I'd met a guy. A mutual friend had introduced us at a mediocre punk show, and my first impression of Kenneth was that he outpunked the punks with how very few shits he gave. To be fair, he hadn't had a place to put them. His shorts were high and tight, and he'd arrived at the show on a bicycle, his preferred mode of transportation. My friend had told me he bikes 50 miles a day, a claim I'd been skeptical of, but on first glance, he looked the part. Besides his tight shorts and high socks, he had the heroin chic build of an endurance athlete, and a red nose that signaled constant exposure to the elements. As I began talking to him, I quickly understood that Kenneth was at home in the elements. In any element, not because he fit in with them, but because he didn't. He was an observer, a studious voyeur of human existence. Wherever he went, there would be a place for him to bear witness to the odd spectacle of consciousness. When I walked up to him to introduce myself, he'd been listening to a self-identified schizophrenic man describe plots on his life and river monsters in his head, etc. Kenneth had been all ears, nodding at the appropriate times in polite and earnest but detached interest. He had pretty much the same response a few hours later when I told him I was emotionally unavailable, and then asked him if he wanted to make out in my car. Nothing riled Kenneth up, but everything delighted him. I'd been hanging out with him since then, using the hearty sounding board of his mind to help me process everything from my non-relationship with Sarge to my impending return to the academy. He has a robotic interiority, an ability to readily accept the emotional experience of others and convert it into raw data for deeper understanding. He can do this with almost no disruption from his own emotional experience, either because he doesn't have one or because he's trained himself out of it with a daily dose of Delta-8 exposure and round-the-clock analysis. Either way, the results speak for themselves. He spends 8 hours a day working for a tech company, between 1 to 3 hours a day biking, and the balance of his waking time finding tasks and accomplishing them with the joy of a working dog. Often these are tasks for others, which is remarkably kind but sometimes overbearing. I learned to be careful what I say around Kenneth. He will quite literally bike 20 miles across town to bring me something I mentioned craving in passing. I know this because it happens, multiple times. The really amazing part is that I don't credit our strange arrangement. The call of flesh might be an enticement for Kenneth, but he'd just as soon do this for a stranger, for that schizophrenic guy, for instance. Most interesting of all, it's not kindness that propels Kenneth, not some deep commitment to making the world a better place. To hear him say it, he doesn't really give two shits about the world. What drives Kenneth isn't a value system, but capacity. It's inner space. I've never met a person less tortured by themselves. It's very confusing for me, and even more threatening. The man has no moral framework, no God, no concept of good and evil. The only thing he worships are Zen and sweating. While I'm crying and spinning my wheels, though, he's helping people in parking lots that have locked themselves out of their cars. His presence, while often appreciated, is often a thorn in my side. It pisses me off that he's happier than I am, and much more useful to the greater good. There's something he knows that I don't. He'd be more than happy to tell me about it, no doubt, which pisses me off even more. Over time, he does share his non-secrets, enlightening me in conversational fragments that usually take place around some sort of meltdown. Maybe I eat more than I think I should, or sleep in later than I'd like to, and all hell breaks loose in my mind. Kenneth watches my temper tantrums, with his head cocked in interest. He doesn't understand why I insist on torturing myself under the guise of moral rectitude. He points out that it might be counterproductive. He suggests that I am in love with suffering, and also that I've mistaken it for honor. He gets dangerously close to seeing the whole truth, something I myself have long avoided. He knows that in the background of these superficial irritants is a deeper one. One time I cry because I've eaten a slice of cake or skipped a workout. I'm really crying because I'm not who I think I should be. Everyone else in my life has always lauded me for these outputs of my self-flagellation. He wonders if I need the self-flagellation. His existence standing in counterpoint to it. He thinks maybe my outputs could be better without it, without the shame that has driven me for so long. In this way, our situationship is terribly uncomfortable. In my current world of wine, cheese, and casual sex, I'm at odds with the person I'm trying to concoct out of my own ashes. The more I relax, the more anxious I become. It's a paradox only I can pull off, and I resent that Kenneth sees it. It was easier when I was simply ashamed and anxious. Now I am ashamed of my shame, anxious about my anxiety. I was comfortable in my despair before I met him. His enlightenment has threatened its delicate homeostasis. Little sip of beer. That's me editorializing. The culminating event of this rousing juxtaposition takes place one night after we go out for burritos. I'm bloated and I smell bad, and it's all my nervous system needs to crawl out of my throat and catapult itself skyward. I screech bloody murder and kick several trash cans over until their contents are all over the sidewalk, and I'm amongst them. I stay there, sitting in trash and hyperventilating for several minutes until Kenneth convinces me to get in my car. Good thing, because a cop car arrives, a police officer stepping out and scratching his head. I got a call a few minutes ago about someone screaming. Have y'all heard anything? He asks us from across the street. Kenneth declines politely. I can't look at either one of them in the eye. If I had always been praised for the outputs of my self-flagellation, I'd always been coddled when I ran amok and turned me inside out. Even Sarge, in his own way, had a soft spot for my explosivity. Not exactly accommodating it, but always allowing for it as a necessary ingredient in my makeup. Kenneth shocks me by having no such tolerance. He's nice enough, but he tells me on site that I owe him and his neighbors an apology. My distress has disturbed the peace, period. I'm furious for days. I can't fathom how someone could look at poor little me with my mind in a tizzy and blame me for it. Is that what happened? I do postmortem after postmortem, alone and with him, and each time I reach the same impassable barrier. The agency I desire, writ large, rests on the accountability I'm willing to take. Blame is just a word. Agency is a contract. It requires I sign my name under stipulations recognizing that I am more in control of my experience than I ever wanted to know. That's what Kenneth has taught me. The liberation and responsibility required for self-ownership. His emotional detachment has been the methodology, but the lesson has been that I hold the keys, and the choice is mine. Stay locked up in a prison I put myself in, or walk out the door. It's a devastating lesson, blasting my self-concept to pieces. I can no longer pity myself as some afflicted little girl. Instead, I am a woman, choosing. This terraforms me so rapidly and drastically that I don't know where I am. Terrified in new territory, I cling to my map. Oof. Well done. I mean, aside from the, self-indulgent part, just a good piece of writing. The degree of self-awareness and the ability to describe it. I'm telling you, that's what I liked about her. She was smart. She knew how to ask the right questions, even when she didn't like the answers, So, yeah, my dude, that's about it. I think I'm going to go chat with my parents now. Speaking of which, shout out to my parents, love you, bye. And shout out to Travis, my dude. Shout out to my parents, love you, bye.